this. We've done 8,500 brain scans. I can tell you when a person's about ready to change. I can tell you why people don't change. I can tell you what it takes to change.
So what's it take to change?
Well, you change. Most people keep their attention, always their awareness on their body. They keep their attention on everything in their environment, people and things. Their brain is always scanning everything around us to determine what's known and unknown, what's safe and unsafe, right? And, we do that all the time. So our research shows that the moment you take your attention off your body and you go from somebody to nobody, you take your attention off the people in your life and go from who you identify with, from someone to no one. And so many people spend their whole life building an identity of being someone. Take your attention off your cell phone, your computer, your car, and go from something to nothing. Take your attention off where you're sitting, where you need to be, someplace you have to go from somewhere to nowhere. And take your attention off time, linear, thinking about the predictable future or the familiar past, and fall into the generous present moment and go from some time to no time. Then all you're left with is consciousness. And that's the moment you're no longer playing by the same rules of matter to matter. And there's a very elegant moment that takes place in the brain. In fact, I was just showing my research to a group of researchers in Santa Cruz this past week, and they were blown away. And I said, now watch, this person's going to have a transformational moment. They said, how do you know? I go, I've seen enough of these. And the next moment, the whole brain just lights up. That person is switched on. They'll never be the same person again. They're having a transcendental moment. And we could actually predict it and teach it now. It's a formula. Just like you doing sports, it just becomes a formula.
Sure.
And then you change the formula and you add to it, right? So when you no longer are identifying with your body, your environment, and time, that's the moment you're pure consciousness. Now,
you're just an idea.
You're an awareness.
Awareness
that has nothing to do with local space and time. And now, if you're
you
no
can go
longer
beyond anything.
You can go beyond, and that's when the brain, because the brain doesn't change the brain. It takes a long time. It takes a long time for the personality to change the personality, for the ego to change the ego. The programs to change the programs takes forever. Matter takes a long time to change matter. But when you're in this moment, you're no longer playing by those rules. Consciousness is the phenomenon above matter. In fact, consciousness is beginning to activate or manipulate circuits in the brain. People just think the brain is creating consciousness. No, consciousness is executing the brain, right? So then, if the brain can change, then the mind doesn't change the brain. Mind is the brain in action. It's consciousness that changes it. So when people begin to disengage and get beyond themselves, you are at your absolute best when you get beyond yourself. Now, getting the person to that point.
How does someone get to that point?
Yeah, so we teach them that formula. We teach them to that point where all of a sudden they reach that generous present moment where they just feel connected. And when they're in that place, all the things they thought they wanted, they actually no longer want because they feel like they already have them. So then imagine living your life from that place. You would be less judgmental, and you would be less frustrated, you would be less impatient.
Less reactive,
And so the formula then is that it requires a clear intention, which is a coherent brain. And when you're living stressed out and something goes wrong, and you're threatened, or you can't predict an outcome, or you have the perception that something's getting worse, or you can't control it, you switch on that fight or flight nervous system that we talked about. Now here's what happens. When that occurs, you start shifting your attention from one person to one problem, to one thing, to another person, to another place, because your brain is trying to predict the next moment. Well, every one of those people and things and places has this neurological network in your brain. So as you shift your attention from one to the next, it's like a lightning storm in the clouds. Your brain starts firing very incoherently. And when your brain is incoherent, you're incoherent. And when you're living by the hormones of stress, not a time to create.
No.
Not a time to open your heart. Not a time to learn. Not a time to trust. And it's a time to run, fight, or hide. So people spend 70% of their time of their life living in this state.
Wow.
So think about it. So
miserable.
So then when you're under stress, if there's a cougar around the corner, you're not going to sit down and meditate. You're not going to sit still, right? But so
jump
imagine
off a tree,
here you got the survival gene switched on, and nobody is going to believe in possibility when you're living in survival, right?
Wow, yeah.
So then, when you're living in stress, what happens is you narrow your focus on the cause. You narrow your focus on matter, the object, the thing. And so people get switched on and all of their attention is on their outer world. When the hormones of stress kick on, the body gets an arousal, now your attention is on the body. And of course, when you're under stress, you're trying to predict the future based on the past. And now you're literally enslaved into three-dimensional reality. So then how do you get what you want? You got to try harder, you got to force it more, you got to work harder, you got to fight for it. It's matter trying to change matter.
It's exhausting.
And people just burn out, right? So then we now know that when you go from a narrow focus on something and you begin to open your focus, you create a sense, an awareness, that the act of opening your focus causes you to stop thinking. And if you stop thinking, you no longer activate those circuits and you start to slow your brain waves down. And as you slow your brain waves down, you start connecting to that autonomic nervous system, the thing that's giving you life. And all of a sudden, when you get beyond yourself, it says, he's gone. Let's step in and just clean up this mess before he gets back.
Really?
And its job is to create order and balance.
So your body will start to do that for you.
The innate intelligence will step right in. Once you connect, you got to connect. So you got to know how to change your brain waves. You can't change your brain waves and you stay in that active state. You're basically moving furniture around. You're analyzing your life within some disturbing emotion. And I can tell you, after looking at all those brain scans, if you're analyzing your life within some disturbing emotion, you're going to make your brain worse. In fact, you are thinking in the past, right? So you teach people the formula, how to open their focus, change their brain waves, connect to that invisible field, and all of a sudden different compartments of the brain start synchronizing. The front of the brain starts talking to the back of the brain. The right side starts talking to the left side. And all of a sudden, what sinks in the brain links in the brain. And all of a sudden, you see this person starting to feel more like themselves. And when you see those two hemispheres of the brain start lighting up, watch out, because that person's going to feel really whole. They're going to start loving life. They're going to feel like they're going to be in love with life because the union of polarity and duality is wholeness at the exact same time. Coherent brain. When you're resentful, when you're judgmental, when you're impatient, your heart beats out of rhythm. Why? You're stepping on the gas and you're stepping on the brake at the same time. Your body and its intelligence, living in survival, is saying T-Rex is back there, but you're not running because you're sitting across the table looking at somebody smiling and your body's revved up, right? So the heart is beating arrhythmically. And when that happens, you're squandering or you're using all the body's life force and turning it into chemistry, right?
You're using all that energy to survive as opposed to think beyond.
Right. So you're drawing from your vital life force, that invisible field around your body, and you're turning it into chemistry. You actually are going to shrink your own field. The hormones of stress cause us to be materialists, right? We when we're under stress, we're using our senses to determine reality. So now you feel more like matter and less like energy, more separate from possibility. So then to teach a person then how to regulate that heart center. And we do this, we've done 6,000 heart scans. Why? Because if I can teach you how to get in that heart state, and I can teach you how to activate that center, and I can teach you how to regulate an elevated emotion, the heart starts to create a very coherent signature. And when the heart starts beating like a drum, like dropping a pebble in water, it begins to produce a measurable magnetic field up to 3 meters wide. Now you're more energy than matter, more wave than particle. Now, that field that's being created is measurable, and that's an energy, and energy is frequency, and all frequency carries information. So what is the information when it makes it here?
That you're sharing into the world.
It could carry the thought of your healing. Why? Because it's consistent with the energy. Guilt isn't going to carry the thought of your healing. It's a different frequency. And all of a sudden now, the person is elevating their emotional state and they're allowing their thought to be carried on that frequency. They're broadcasting a whole new energetic signature. But thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So then the question is, if you keep practicing creating that state of being, it should become familiar to you, yes or no?
Yes.
The word meditation literally means to become familiar with. So then if you're practicing moving into these elevated states and your heart is coherent and we're measuring and I can say, Louis, you got it. Now do it for 30 minutes. Now do it for 60 minutes. And you practice creating that coherence. You'll know when you're there and when you're not, yes or no?
Sure.
And then you would be able to say, like a skill, like anything else, give me a minute. I'm going to step out, and you're going to go back into heart coherence and bring up that state.
How do we get there in the heart?
Oh, well, then we practice the formula. Again, rest your attention, start calling up elevated emotions, and when you start seeing that starts happening, then you sustain it, then you keep practicing, and all of a sudden, it gets longer and longer and longer. Now, what's the relevance behind that? Well, we've measured neurotransmitters. So when a person actually activates their heart, the heart releases a chemical called oxytocin. Oxytocin is actually the love chemical. Oxytocin signals nitric oxide. Nitric oxide signals another chemical called endothelial-derived relaxing factor. What does that do? Causes the vessels in your heart to swell. Wow. You will literally have energy in your heart. You will literally feel like your heart is full. Now, once you have that feeling, you're not going to want to trade that feeling for anyone or anything. You're going to say, why would I judge that person? If I judge that person, I'm going to lose this feeling. Now, all of a sudden, you're self-regulating. Now, once the heart is activated, I just was at the research lab this week. Once the heart is activated, it acts as an amplifier, and it amplifies energy in the brain. So once you start opening that heart, and it begins to signal the brain, you're going to suppress the survival centers. In fact, the research shows it will reset your baseline. In other words, if you're anxious and vigilant and you learn how to self-regulate, you'll actually reset the baseline, and you'll say, well, the trauma was 15 years ago, I saw somebody get murdered or whatever. And then we'll say, yeah. But the moment the heart, not the brain, it's the heart that actually resets the amygdala. And all of a sudden, the person switches down, and all of a sudden, like, I just don't have anxiety. We have thousands of brain scans with anxiety and depression from people from all walks of life. They've reset, and all of a sudden, they don't have that anxiety. They don't have to take medications or do anything else. They know how to self-regulate. When you're living in survival, I'll tell you this, when the survival gene is activated, out of the infinite potentials in the quantum field, you'll always choose the worst case scenario. Why? Because if you're in survival and you're preparing for the worst, there's always better chances of surviving if anything less happens. So people are always selecting the worst thing in their mind, and they begin to emotionally embrace that future before it happens. Thought and emotion, you start conditioning. So you're conditioning the body to become the mind of fear. You keep doing that enough times, once the body becomes the mind, it's a subconscious program. The person has a panic attack. Try as you may to control it with your conscious mind, you can't. You programmed it subconsciously. Now you worry about the next panic attack, and as you start worrying about the next panic attack, it's the vigilance that creates the next one.
Wow.
Now here's what's happening in our work. People who are self-regulating and creating these elevated states, we have heart scans of them sustaining heart coherence for a whole hour during a meditation. Then at the end of the day, they're still wearing the monitor. It's 8 o'clock at night, they're not even in a meditation, and for a whole entire hour they're in heart coherence. We say to the woman, what's going on here? She said, I have no idea. I was just getting ready for bed, and all of a sudden my heart just swelled up. It was so intense I had to lay on my back and surrender to love instead of surrendering to fear. She had a spontaneous love attack instead of a spontaneous panic attack. Now, I would call that the natural state of being. So then, if you're living by those elevated states and you know how to feel that emotion of your future before it happens, you're less likely to wait for it to happen because you'll feel like it already happened. You're less likely to try to control it. You'll know that the moment you lose the feeling, you just disconnected, and you're going to make your way back. And when you get good at it, no person, no thing, no experience can take it away from you. Wow. And now you're empowered. And if you understand the laws of how creation happens, then you're less likely to compete and rush to get what you want. You're going to know that it's going to come to you. And now that's the new model of how we create.
Knowing it's going to come to us at the right time. What if we want it faster?
No, you just do it again. But remember, if you're trying to make it happen faster, you're back to the old self.
Right.
The new self would never do that. The new self would constantly stay there. And so then how does it appear? It appears in a way that you can't expect. Because if you can predict it, it's the known. It's going to come in a way that you haven't thought of, an unknown. And it's got to rock your world. It's got to catch you off guard. It's got to leave you no doubt that what you've been doing inside of you that produces some effect outside of you. And when you correlate what you've been doing inside of you with the effect that you produced outside of you, you're going to pay attention to what you did and do it again. And the energy of the joy that you feel when it happens, you're going to use that energy to create again. Now, people say to me, well, I'm this way because of that person and that thing, I would say to them, so you mean then that person or that experience out there is controlling your thoughts and feelings? Right. That means you're a victim to your environment. But when you start changing your thoughts and feelings and it starts to produce an effect in your environment, you're going to change the belief that you're a victim consciously or subconsciously of your life to becoming more of a creator of your life. And now all of a sudden when you become more a creator of your life, you can't blame anybody. You can't say, well, that person or that thing. You'd have to say, I got to be greater than that environmental condition. Who in history can I study that had the same challenges? What did they do? Let me just work that into my rehearsal so that I can improve, right? Just like you've done with sports. It's the same process.
Yeah.